Dangerously Close. This episode was brought to you by William Mitchell Audio. Deep in the frozen tundra of North America, no one can hear you scream. That is, unless you go to williammitchellaudio.com. Not only will people be able to hear you scream, but William Mitchell Audio will bring professionalism and excellence to every single scream you perform. Go to williammitchellaudio.com.
And I love that I have your bio in the smallest possible font for this, which is already the hardest part for me.
That's why I'm wearing glasses as well. There you go. Yeah.
I haven't had my eyes checked in 20 years, probably last time I had my eyes checked. I probably could actually use some reading glasses.
Ignorance is bliss. Yeah.
Ignorance is bliss. My guest today is Frank Wolf. Frank Wolf is a Canadian adventurer, writer, filmmaker, and environmentalist. He is known for books, feature magazine articles, online columns, and films that document the Canadian North. Nope, that's not what. Wilderness expeditions around the world with a focus on the Canadian North. I told you this fine print was not going to be good for me. His expeditions include being the first to canoe across Canada in one season and cycling 2,000 kilometers in winter on the Yukon River from Dawson to Nome. In 2020, he was named one of Canada's greatest 90 explorers of all time by Canadian Geographic magazine. And in 2012, he was named one of Canada's top 10 adventurers by Explore magazine. His first book of adventures, Lines on a Map, was released in October 2018. His films include Wild Ones, The Hand of Franklin, Kituriak? Is that right?
Yeah, Kituriak.
All right. First try. On the Line, Mammalian, and Borealis, all of which broadcast on CBC's documentary channel in Canada. What's up, Frank?
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me, man.
Thanks for being patient while I struggled through that. The reading portion. The reading portion is mostly over now.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, like that word Kituriak. That's the Inuit language, which is the indigenous people of northern Canada. Basically, it's very tough to pronounce. You know, they got Q's that sound like K's, and the Kituriak actually means mosquito in their language. So you nailed it. You did well there. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
That's great. So I learned a new word too. So it means mosquito.
Mosquito and Inuktitut. Yes, exactly.
I spend a lot of time in the Pacific Northwest, where that's kind of like where I'm most familiar with some of the indigenous languages and like some of the harder to pronounce names of places I've visited. But I have yet to be in Canada.
So you've been up in Seattle area and that sort of thing, or
yeah,
I'm in Vancouver, so I know the Pacific Northwest really well. I mean, gorgeous area, and it's I just finished a trip a couple of weeks ago. We circumnavigated Vancouver Island, which is a big island just off the coast of just the southern tip. Basically crosses the border of the U.S. and Canada, but it's like a 1,300 kilometer journey around that coast recently. So I really do love the Pacific Northwest and the giant trees, the amazing wildlife out on the ocean, like the whales and everything that it offers there for sure. It's got a certain aesthetic that's special for sure.
It's one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to. I've yet to see a lot of the world, but
where have you been there? Like, where have you been?
So specifically, mostly actually in Seattle, the city. But outside of there, doing things that are in the wilderness and really experiencing, like I climbed a small mountain there called Mount Si. It's a for the most part it's just a strenuous hike for the first 4 hours, and then the last 30 minutes is real climb. It's where it would be best to have gear. When I went, I was unaware, so when I got there, I was kind of doing a little
freestyling,
a little bit of dangerous shit, because I should have probably been clipped in. But the thing was, after we had spent the first 4 hours getting to that point, I was not going to just stop and go back down without. No, I wanted to see from the top. That's the whole point. Is
you wanted the summit. You ignored the kind of that voice in the back of your head that tells you to go down. It's like you wanted it, you went for it, and I mean that's what it's all about. Sometimes just you have to. Like anything, like life begins beyond your comfort zone. It's the same with doing things in the outdoors, right? You go out there because it's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to get you're going to push beyond boundaries that you're comfortable doing, because you're faced with situations in the wilderness that are out of your control, and they put you in these kind of, but then you always like grow out of that too, right? And you always have a more of a sense of satisfaction and more of a memory, everything, when you kind of push yourself a little bit, for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, and ever since I was there, I mean, I can't wait to go and do it again. I mean, I love that. But speaking of spots that actually maybe you might be more familiar with, a little bit further north, which is right on the edge of Canada. So I think from the top of the mountain, you could definitely see into Canadian territory. Right. It's an area called Snoqualmie. I don't know if you're familiar with there, but that's where I snowboard. Sure.
So got it. Yeah.
It's actually the only place I've ever snowboarded. I haven't been to any other. I've never done it in Colorado or any of the more famous places. Just Snoqualmie.
Yeah, like not far from there, I do a lot of my skiing, like backcountry skiing, as well as some front country skiing at Mount Baker, which is just a bit north of Snoqualmie there. Amazing skiing in that whole zone, and tons of snow, right? I think Baker still has a world record for snowfall in a year, which is 94 feet. Whoa. And so they just get puked on that whole kind of Snoqualmie Baker zone up and down the Cascades there. So it's awesome for, like you were doing, snowboarding or mountaineering or whitewater paddling. There's tons of stuff going on there for sure. Yeah.
For what I know, you've experienced a lot of whitewater. Have you ever been on the Ocoee? That's here in Tennessee. Well, it goes through several states, but
I actually went to, way back in the day, I went to the University of Michigan. I was there on like a track and cross country running scholarship. And the only time I've ever been through Tennessee is on a road trip with a bunch of buddies down to Daytona for spring break. So that was my
nice.
I think we bought a bunch of fireworks in a big warehouse at the time or whatever. So that's my only time I've been through Tennessee. So I definitely have to go for sure. Yeah.
And you might, I mean, I think you would. I've done whitewater on the Ocoee. I think you would really enjoy it. It's very, very beautiful. The Olympics, they did the Olympics on that river, and I can't recall which year. It must have been the year that it was held in Atlanta. That
96 must have been 96.
Must have been 96.
Sure. Yeah.
But hey man, actually I have a question that I really wanted to kick it off with, and it's just it's kind of what I was just reading in your introduction. And first of all, I have to ask, how does canoeing across the entire country of Canada in a season work logistically? Because I wouldn't have a clue how to plan something like that. Like there have to be some pretty intense obstacles to traverse that distance.
Yeah, for sure. It was about 8,000 kilometers, so 5,000 mile journey. And one season basically means between, winters. So you start in April and you finish in October. Before you're kind of there getting in, and once the ice goes out and finishing before it comes in again. But I mean, Canada, if you look at the geography and geology of Canada, there's nowhere like in the world as far as the interconnected waterways. Literally, with the Canadian Shield and the way the glaciers carved up, most of the country, you have this literally endless network of lakes and rivers that all connect all the way until you get to like the Rocky Mountains, and you got a bit of a barrier in your way there. And so
I was going to ask if you had if you were ever blocked by a mountain range, because I mean, it just seemed inevitable.
And so then we had to do like a 400-kilometer portage. And at the time, we just went basically on that point. We just kind of put all our stuff on a pair of mid wheels, which we put our canoe on, and then just walked for 7 days, basically 40 miles a day, until we got to the first bit of water in the Rockies, and then went down the Fraser River, which goes all the way through BC to the ocean. So that was kind of the big kind of portage we had to do or carry of our gear, where you couldn't really paddle on the water there. But otherwise, pretty much all the way from the Atlantic Ocean in New Brunswick, where we started, going upstream and downstream. So if you're linking across the way, you're always end up going uprivers a lot of the time, right? So we went upstream through, for must have been a couple thousand kilometers at least, to go through 3 of our provinces: Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, just to get to the Rockies. Because then on the other side, it's a much stronger river, the Fraser, that runs all the way through BC, much more difficult to go upstream on. So
it's going to be
as long as you can always get
upriver for that kind of distance.
It's surprising, like looking at a river upstream, it's if you along the edges, it's actually going downstream. So the way the water hits a corner, it'll actually flow upstream on the edges. If like an eddy or whatever in a river, if you've been on the Ocoee or whatever, if you work the edges, you can actually paddle a lot of it upstream and not have to be dragging your boat along. So we were actually doing okay, like 40 kilometers a day going upstream at a steady kind of clip. So and that's the way people like traditionally used to travel in Canada, the indigenous people, and then the voyageurs, the fur traders, they would have gone up and down these rivers. There were no roads, right? These were the roads of Canada that kind of built the country. And so we kind of followed these kind of general kind of mainline routes through that trip. And back in the day, and that was back in 95. And that just kind of kicked off my kind of expedition or journeying career, which is really just traveling in my mind. You're just kind of traveling in unique ways and making up these journeys through these beautiful wilderness areas. And you really never know what you get. There's nothing to really consult in terms of like a guidebook or a travel guide. And that's the beauty of doing these things, right? You're out there and you're kind of living kind of an anarchistic kind of way. No one can tell you what to do. You're free in the wilderness, and you can just, you got basically thousands of kilometers ahead of you, and every day is different. Every day is new. It just really keeps you in the moment, really present. It's kind of my real happy place in terms of like being out there on one of these journeys, for sure.
It's funny. I recently decided to reread The Last of the Mohicans, which is a very dense, kind of silly book in some ways, because it was in that time that would have been kind of considered like a Vin Diesel movie by those standards. But what is so interesting is like there is so much of that book that is those people and performing these near miraculous feats of canoeing. I mean, that's like, I mean, that's how they're avoiding the entire French army, and also like other rival tribes and things like that. Is that these people are masters of canoeing. And it's an interesting, one anecdote that I really absolutely must share with you, because it's just, I've only
seen the movie with Daniel Day-Lewis, so I haven't read the book yet.
Well, honestly, that's good enough. Daniel Day-Lewis is one of the greatest actors to live. So
absolutely, I agree. Yeah.
No, I wanted to add just one last thing. I'm sorry I just go off on a tangent, but you did make me think of this too. Is that one of my closest near-death experiences was an actual canoeing accident. Because I was on the Buffalo River, and it had been a very powerful rain, and there were no expected rapids, but there had been some trees that had fallen.
Right.
And the person in the canoe with me had never been canoeing before. And so when we were coming up to the rapids, I was trying to call up to her, what to do, but she was facing me, because she was just sitting there drinking a beer, not expecting like very, very powerful water. And so we flipped, and I got pinned by my chest to the bottom of the river. And I was underwater for a very long time. And I got to be honest, I think maybe I had 10 seconds left in me before I was going to just take a lungful. But I wiggled free like right at that moment. And then we had to swim about 4 miles to catch up with our group. And because we had to ditch the canoe. There was no way to get it out.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're lucky. I mean, water is powerful. I mean, same with me. My kind of nearest death experience and all my, travel over the years was I did the cross Canada canoe trip. And then in 1998, like a few years later, I tried to go reverse it and then come up through northern BC and through the mountains. And we basically worked our way up this river called the Skeena River, which comes from just below the Alaska Panhandle. We worked our way for about a week up that. We got Jardy along the way. So picked it up. We had like bad diarrhea. We had to stop for a couple of days while we destroyed a motel room.
Oh man.
And the medication kind of, not a motel room toilet to be specific.
At least you were able to access a motel, because
and medication too, to kind of take care of this kind of parasite. But then we kept going up, and we got to this river called the Babine River. And this is like in April, and that's when all the snow is kind of melting and the water's coming down really heavy. And we got to this final of the Babine River through a lot of portaging, and we couldn't get up the edge. It was flooded edge to edge. It's like a canyon about 30, 40 kilometers long. And so we ended up just dragging through the bush in grizzly bear country slowly, like 2 kilometers a day, going up and down these canyons, and just kind of running out of food, running out of energy, and realizing we're not going to get through this until our next food supply. So we finally got past the canyon. But then we kind of cracked our canoe. We decided we're going to reverse back to the beginning of this bad canyon, and then we'll just have to do all the brutal portaging all the way back. And so we go down. It's really powerful water. At that point, it was not experienced whitewater paddler. We get flipped in like an 8-foot wave. And then as we're swimming down, this moose is on shore. We scare it up, and it jumps into the water ahead of us. So we're actually ripping down this
holy
big
shit.
river with a moose and us two in our canoe floating around.
That's the most dangerous animal in Canada, isn't it? Am I correct?
No, I think in rut, it can be very dangerous in the fall. Like when they're mating, those big males will definitely try to take you out. They'll think you're a competitor. Yeah, exactly.
I had heard they're kind of like almost like, how a hippopotamus would be like the most dangerous animal in Africa, surprisingly.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd heard things that a moose will just stomp you to death if you fuck with it.
They will in rutting season, but definitely not if they're swimming down a whitewater river with you. So we got out in this big, powerful eddy before the moose just kept going down this canyon, so we never saw him again. We kept going down, and then as we just paddling along, you can see the beginning of these canyon walls 100 feet high ahead of us, and then we know we can get where we can get out, but then we flipped, couldn't get out, and we got swept into this canyon. And then the guy I was with, he was pretty quickly, he swallowed a lot of water. We had dry suits and PFDs on, but he was kind of saying, I can't go on very much more. We were trying to stay with the canoe, but you literally couldn't get out because the water is pressed against these canyon walls and you're just scraping your fingers along. There's nowhere to stop. There's no eddies. It's just running hot.
Yeah.
And then I just shouted at him, get out where you can. Just forget about the canoe. I'll stay with the canoe. And then he eventually, he got to this pile of rocks. He actually hung onto it, crawled up, and he just kind of looks at me with these dead eyes, and like he was just exhausted. And I was still full of energy. That's the time when you're like still invincible. I hadn't had that near-death experience yet, and I thought I can get this canoe out somewhere. I just had this absolute stupid confidence. And then so Ben, he kind of just looks at me, and I say, I'll get it out around the next corner. And I could see in his eyes, he goes, I'm never gonna fucking see that guy again.
Yeah.
And then so I'm down there, and it's kind of narrowing, and then I actually straddle the belly of the canoe, and I'm going down, and I can see it just narrowing in the pinhole, but I just think I can ride this thing all the way to the ocean. I can do this. And then
oh my God,
I quickly flipped to knocked off, and then I'm struggling with the canoe again. And I was sponsored by National Geographic for that one. I had a camera with a red light still running, like mounted on the canoe in the middle. I remember just struggling with it and kind of thinking, am I filming my death here? Is this going to happen? And then not too soon after that, thought there was a big river wide recirculating hole. So basically edge to edge, the whole river going kind of underwater. And I went down with it, me and the canoe, and just got pulled down really deep, like 10 feet, popped me back up. I got like half a breath, but then down again and held a bit longer, a little bit longer.
Terrifying.
And then it finally released me, and then it put me down really deep, like bottom of the river kind of thing. It was just dark and murky, and my lungs were going to explode. I was like 20 feet underwater. I thought, I have to breathe. I'm going to breathe in water. This is it. I'm dead. And then I swam really hard to the side, just like a last burst of energy, and it released me up the edge of the canyon, and I grabbed onto some rocks there and managed to haul myself out. And then I kind of dragged myself up, and the canoe kind of just popped out of the hole at the same time and just started zipping down at like 20 miles an hour down the river. And I just let out this big kind of scream because I basically survived death or whatever. And then I had to like crawl out of the canyon and walk a couple hours. Eventually bumped into a guy who was checking the beginning of the road, and we got a helicopter out. We actually went and did a helicopter rescue of my buddy up the canyon. But after that, I actually decided I'm going to start learning how to whitewater paddle, and you respect the river. And so either you get back on the horse or you just give up completely, right? So but that was kind of an early experience. If you survive those near-death experiences, hopefully you like learn a lesson and you kind of grow from that. And that's if you learn from your mistakes, as long as you don't die, you will become better in the outdoors and adventure. Nature will smack you around a bit, and that's and you definitely learn to respect it and learn about it in order, if you're going to keep on surviving and doing these things, right?
And to go back just a moment, when you were talking about like in that, when you're getting beat down, you're getting thrown down to the bottom of the river, and you're getting exhausted, your lungs are getting worn out, but you get that final burst of energy. That's like the little story I told earlier, like that is precisely how I got out of my situation. I was down there, I was pinned, I was trying to find ways to reach something to pull myself out. And what it was is I was down there longer and longer, realizing I couldn't reach the edge of the canoe or anything to pull myself. And then I realized, like, it just, kind of in my mind, I was like, these are the final, like you said, these are the final moments of my life. Am I gonna do something or not? And I just kind of dug deep down into a part of myself that I don't typically dig into. And
yeah, it's just there for these special occasions. Yeah,
just one of the most high energy bursts of power that I've ever probably used in my life to get. And I was only able to catch the edge of get myself enough to catch the edge of the canoe with my forefinger and middle finger and use that to slide out. And then I didn't surface until, I surfaced like 30 feet further down the river before I was out, and I was puking in water and I couldn't breathe or call back to my friend who had left with the canoe for a long, because, I had so much water in my lungs. When you said that final burst, it really resonated with me. It's a unique experience that you kind of have to.
Yeah. Your body doesn't, your body only accesses that at the very edge of the blackness. It's like you have that burst of energy, that one last chance you have of being alive, or else you're gone. Right. So I think everyone's got that, but most people probably, thankfully probably don't have to use that reserve that's in probably each of us. Right. So, but definitely you learn. I'm sure you learn from that experience and everything that happened to lead up to what happened, and then you getting out too. Right. So,
I do want to, this is something that it was when I was asking you about the logistics of doing this kind of 5,000 mile canoe trip, and all these things. One of the first things one of the first things obviously popped in my head is, I thought, what if like what you said, you came up against the Rocky Mountains, like those kind of obstacles, like the land itself. But then I was realizing like how difficult it is to, and you were saying that you were running short on food on that last.
That just because our kind of pacing out and timing was off on that one for sure. Yeah.
Do you like supplement? Do you like try to do any kind of fishing or wild foraging to supplement your like store of food, or is that not even something that you try to add to it?
Yeah, like I've kind of definitely refined the way I do I can carry, like I've carried up to 50 days of food in a canoe. Like you can carry 50 days or whatever for that. So quite a bit of food, and that sort of, even with like portaging and carryovers, you can still get it through. But when I do my trips, I don't count on supplementing. Basically, if you're doing like, say, a 2,000 mile canoe trip in the wilderness and there's no towns between where you start and where you finish, and typically I'll kind of start in a small little town or village, and I'll just use my own power, and I don't usually use bush planes and stuff like that to drop to the top. I kind of work my way upstream through the land and this sort of thing. You kind of see more that way. But you have to, if you try to forage and count on foraging and fishing, you're not going to move very quickly. So it's almost like in terms of doing a long journey, it's counterproductive, I think, to count on that, because then if you're not moving and you're eating, you're still not going anywhere. You want to basically be able to cover a certain amount of consistent distance. So I usually have all my food that I need for the trip. So just simple, like oatmeal in the morning with coffee, some tortillas with like, meat and cheese or whatever for lunch, like, Clip Bars, a bit of trail mix, and then just some freeze-dried food in the evening. And that's going to get me through. But then the nice thing about Canada in the North, everyone's a heroic fisherman up there, right? Yeah. You can basically fire in, if you don't have like something on your line in like 3 casts, like a grayling or a big lake trout or a char, then there's no point, but you always will, because these places are just untouched as far as fishing goes. So you could, so often what I'll do is just, if we feel like it, you have a little grill, and then cast the line in, and then you'll have a couple of fish, you throw them on the grill, and then just kind of flick the meat off, have like, say a fish taco the next morning, kind of keep it on the cool bottom of the canoe for that, or just throw it into your freeze-dried food as well. But don't necessarily count on it. Sometimes you just get to camp late, you're tired, you set up camp, you just want to chill out, and then just have your freeze-dried food and that sort of thing. But that's kind of like the fishing and that sort of thing is a bonus, but it's not something I'd ever count on a wilderness trip. You want to basically be prepared. And now I kind of know how much distance I can cover every day consistently, upstream, downstream. On average, I usually go about 40 kilometer day average in the wilderness, through all sorts of conditions. So I kind of know, and you have a measure of reserve of a few days in case you get pinned in by a big wind or something happens. So you're
putting power into it. You're doing, powerful rowing. You're not floating down the stream with a fishing pole in your hand, just bite like it's not just like a 1 day on the river type canoe trip. This is like
yeah. So like I usually do like I'll usually have 10 hours a day of moving or on a river. So I'll get going by 9 a.m., finish around 7. Long days in the summertime, right? Like this time of year up in northern Canada, Nunavut, Northwest Territories, it's 24 hours of daylight. So you don't worry about the light as much. And you can kind of get in your long days, no problem. So just kind of put in a consistent amount of time and just kind of move steadily through, and it all kind of evens out after 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 days, right? So
kind of just a quick pivot. I have another question, just
sure.
that was also from your introduction, that it's moving away from the river to another expedition you did. And I just had some curiosity, I have some questions about that. And it was that you cycled 2,000 kilometers along the Yukon River, and that was
right.
and that was in winter. Am I correct? That was in the
So
what is the temperature along the Yukon River in Canada during the winter? I have to know.
Yeah, the coldest we got, and we were kind of hitting like March into April, so it's kind of like as you're coming out of winter. So you got longer travel days, more light. But the coldest feels like minus 45 Celsius, which is like I think
plus 30.
Yes, well, Celsius and Fahrenheit meet at minus 40. So it's more than minus 40 Fahrenheit as well. They kind of there's like a point minus 40. Yeah, so it's minus 40-ish Fahrenheit basically. So yeah.
Oh my God! I am a cyclist, and there's a point where I cannot stand it, and I think it's somewhere. I think if it's below 10 degrees, I think that's where I lose my my will to be outside. So also I was born in Arizona, and then now I live in Tennessee. I've always lived in very warm weather places.
Yeah.
So, and I guess, do you think there is that kind of like, maybe you have a hardiness for that kind of?
I think, and that was kind of like overnight temperatures. I think probably when we were cycling during the day, probably be like minus 20, 25, which is, it's kind of a manageable temperature. You kind of, and if you're like, and if you're moving, your body generates enough heat to be okay there, as long as you're kind of your hands and everything are covered and that sort of thing. So, and I think
what kind of gear do you use for that? Like, it seems like you would need some pretty extreme gear for the wind chill and.
Yeah, and like that trip, for example, that was pre-fat bikes. We did that back in 2003, and the reason we did the trip is that there's two guys. Speaking about people cycling in winter in 1901, like over 100 years before we did this trip, these two guys had actually cycled in these very simple early day bikes from Dawson to Nome across the Yukon River, like from Dawson. They basically did it because in 1901 there was a gold strike in Nome. And there'd been a big gold strike in Dawson in 98, but all the gold was kind of gone. So about 10,000 people went from Dawson to Nome, and they kind of hammered out this ice road on the river, basically. So these guys had enough of a hard track to kind of go on their bikes. These guys, Max Hirschberg and Ed Jessen. And so we had their journals for our journey. And then we basically followed their route from Dawson to Nome. And ironically, it's actually way less populated and way harder to do now than then, because the only tracks you get are some of the indigenous guys will go village to village on their snow machine tracks, and you can use those because they kind of set up overnight in the cold. And you kind of we kind of had these kind of fat rims that would spread our tires out a little bit, but it was still pretty punchy, and that's kind of allowed us to kind of cycle across. Like on a fat bike now, that trip would be a lot easier because the tires are way wider. They'll distribute your weight more. But back then with the skinnier tires, it was definitely a little bit more like technical. And so we had those.
I can't even imagine in 1901, the technology of bike that you'd be able to use, and the fact that you would have to wear furs. That would be the only kind of gear you could really have to maintain warmth. I guess they were just some bad ass dudes. There's the only way.
Bikes had just kind of come out, and they're basically following in these, because basically most people took dog sleds, and some people even took horses. People taking all sorts of things just to get to Nome for the gold rush.
Yeah,
people couldn't get up by water because it was frozen at the time. It was winter, right? So these guys, Ed Jessen and Max Hirschberg, they kind of made their way along this kind of well-beaten track. And at the time, they had, because there were 10,000 people going across, they had like cookhouses and stuff set along the way. We basically kind of would resupply in these First Nations villages along the way in Alaska, just to kind of get our food and keep going along. We had like down pogies, which is like almost something you wrap around your handlebars that you slip your hand into for So you have a bare hand on your handlebar, but there's this nice down like wrap on your hand that you kind of slip in and out of. We had like basically mountaineering kind of suits, like same thing you'd see guys go up Everest with for like the evening and hanging out daytime. We had minus 50 Celsius, so minus like 45, 50 Fahrenheit bags. So really, good for the overnight temperatures that we'd get sometimes. And and just kind of snacked throughout the day and just kept on moving. Big kind of minus 100 Baffin boots, which are like just kind of basically just big insulated boots that everyone uses up there with flat pedals, and then just keep grinding along. A lot of pushing your bike through snow drifts and stuff too. So that was it, just kind of moving forward. And then we did a film on my YouTube channel. It's called Bikes on Ice. If someone wants to see the journey and experience what we did there, you can check out Frank Wolf YouTube and Bikes on Ice, and they're all free films of these films that I've done over the years. They're mostly on that channel, and you can check out some of those adventures. You can see.
I will definitely check that out.
See what kind of gear we were using and what we went through there too.
It seems like, so, I know that I expressed an aversion to like the extreme cold, but it does seem like just for your mind a very nice period. I mean, it seems like you could really just kind of get locked into the fact that your life is riding that bike, and
it's simple.
It's meditative. And I don't know. It just seems those kind of things really appeal to me. I like long bike rides. I like,
it's the same thing. Like I just kind of used the tool for the job in that case, because we were doing a retracing of guys who use bikes, but I kind of use, I'm not necessarily a canoeist or a kayaker or a skier. I just kind of use whatever the best tool for the job is, but all these journeys have the same kind of mental attitude. It's the same thing. You're kind of, after about 2 weeks, you basically forget who you are, where you came from. Your life becomes this journey, and you forget what your 9-to-5 life in the city is like. That's gone. It's because you get lost in the journey. You get lost in this rhythm. You're fully absorbed and engaged in moving forward and working your way through these landscapes. And that just kind of, that's the beauty and the simplicity of it. I mean, like you said, you're getting up, you're eating food, having a nice cup of coffee, and then just getting in your canoe or in your kayak or on your skis or on your bike, and you're just kind of moving through the landscape. And you're kind of just, it's like a chess match with nature all the time. There's always challenges you're going to be running into. And that's the beauty of it. And you're just kind of doing it day after day after day. You can't really get that on a 1 week or a 2 week trip. You got to be out there for 30 days. You got to do these long journeys, because that's where you really get lost in the kind of the real zen. And you kind of tap into, I think, what we're all wired to be is kind of a very, especially in the wintertime, you have this quiet. The one thing about snow, it absorbs everything, any kind of noise. It's just always so quiet. And so, only thing you hear when you're biking on the snow is the crunch of your tires through the snow, and that's it. And there's nothing else. It's just all absorbed into nature. So that's the beauty about skiing or biking on snow. Any kind of snow kind of trip has that beauty. But same with canoeing or kayaking. You're like just recently kayaking around the West Coast, you hear the kind of the white noise of the surf every night, and that's kind of you're sleeping on these beaches, and you have the surf just kind of lulling you to sleep, and you just, wind, birds waking you up in the morning. This is it. It's very simple sounds of nature, and there's no noise. And I think it's even more important these days. Like, we have such really a busy, almost like plugged in society, right? Where we have everyone's, got their phones and their computers, and everything's got to be happening all the time. It's always so busy out there. You have no choice. There's no connection. There's no cell service. There's no internet. It's just you. And you got things like an inReach, which you can text out. What I do on my trips, I'm doing a trip in about a week. I'm leaving on a 1,300 kilometer canoe trip, but I do a daily haiku on Instagram. So I kind of do a little 575 that basically just kind of captures either the essence of the day or a moment of the day. And then people can see where we're camping that night. So people can follow me along in a map tracking thing, but that's about all I do. I do one haiku every day, and just, so my mom knows where I am, basically. And then kind of go on. So it's just the real simplicity you get with these journeys. And then once you get into the groove of it, it just becomes your normal life. Your tent is your home, your canoe is your office, and your job is moving forward through space and time. That's it. It's simple, so.
Hold up. It's time for another My Views Are My Own astrological reading. This week's astrological sign is Virgo. Hello, Virgo. As you know, Those of the Virgo sign are known to be hardworking, creative, and reliable. And that is why this week you will once again reliably be found tampering with the Book of the Dead, trying to raise the old gods. But watch out, due to your stubborn and overthinking nature, you will accidentally summon the demon Sultan Azazoth, the blind idiot god of chaos. This could cause some trouble because you do hate chaos. But remember, Azazoth is also the blind dreamer of all chaos and destruction. This can cause some friction in the workplace as you try to protect your psyche from descending into the madness brought on by staring into the face of the Cold One. Just remember to be yourself and chant, "Begone, Akamoth! Begone, Vakvaraj!" And don't forget to give yourself some time for self-care. And remember, anything you find relaxing is self-care, like indexing the offspring of Azazoth, such as Nyarlathotep or the Nameless Mist. Thanks for listening, Virgo. And now back to the interview.
It's so funny when you said like just so my mom knows where I am, because like I have no, but I have a very similar thing. My mom is very supportive of me. Just now you were inspiring me so much. Right, I just wanted to pack up my shit right now and get on my bike and just go ride to California.
Just do it, man.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
But that is one of the things that I put in my mind. I'm like, all right, I got to make sure that my mom knows I'm alive along this journey.
Yeah.
But no, she there's nothing she probably supports me doing more than doing wilderness type shit. That's because she knows I get in a lot less trouble in the wild than I do in the city. So
it's true. Yeah.
Shout out to moms, and shout out to there's a lot to be said for getting out of a city and finding the peace of the wild.
And my mom's always been super supportive of same thing. I mean, I think if you do those things, it's good to have that kind of support from your loved ones to go out there and them understanding that this is something that's good for you and it's something you want to do, even though they might be worried. I mean, that's the way it is. I mean, until there was like an inReach or whatever, and I only started using those in like 2016. Before that, it'd be like, okay, I'm going to be about 60 days. If you don't hear from me, that's good news. Because I had a personal locator beacon, which you kind of press and then hopefully someone will come get you, but there's no communication, right? So, and that would be all I carry with me. And that's something even more special in a way where you don't have that connection. You don't even have a choice to have that connection. You're just out there, you're writing in your paper journal every evening and you're just kind of doing your trip. And that's a beautiful thing. So that disconnect is super refreshing and energizing,
I had a strong feeling that when I asked you to come on, I was gonna get that inspiration, that wanderlust itch vibe thing going on, and it's absolutely happening. But I have to move on to this next part because a big part of why I asked you to come talk to me is that you wrote a book called Lines on a Map, which is currently on my reading list. However, I didn't get a chance to read it before this interview because you are a difficult man to catch on the grid. And my options were to wait until you got back from your next expedition and get a chance to read the book first, or obviously my choice was I wanted to talk to you now.
Yeah.
I'll read the book later, but we can talk about it right now just because I've read about what it's about. But I did have a question about that book specifically, and just like with your relationship to it. When you do book readings, is there any particular part of the book you most like to read an excerpt from? Is that
I mean, I did my book was at the Banff. Banff has a big kind of outdoor, book and film festival every year. In 2019, I did a presentation there, and I think there's a few stories there. I guess one story. I mean, I could do a quick reading of that excerpt if you want.
That'd be fantastic. If you don't mind.
I can probably just walk through it here, but there's one story which is more one that I tell in kind of an entertaining / dramatic way, which is when I went across Canada, the guy I did the trip with, I didn't actually know him before I went on the trip. I met him once, 2 weeks before I was going to spend 6 months in the canoe with him. And he ended up being something quite different than I had expected. He was not as advertised. We basically didn't talk to each other for the last 3 months of the trip. We were just kind of both motivated by going forward. Very different people.
Yeah.
But he told an amazing story that almost like held the trip together. So the story he basically told was that he'd basically the first time I met the guy, he kind of lived in a wealthy part of close to Toronto where my folks were. I was visiting them, and I went to visit him in this place called Oakville, and kind of a mansion lined street, pretty well-to-do guy, I guess. So I go up there and I kind of ring the doorbell, and door opens. This kind of magnificent looking man, 6'4", kind of square jaw, hawk nose, blue eyes, had a big Fabio kind of mane of hair, and right away he kind of says, "Let's go for a walk." And I said, "All right, great, let's go for a walk." And so I go out in for a walk, and within a minute he goes into this story that I call The Bear, which is one of the stories in this book. And basically he kind of a lot of people like students and that sort of thing in Canada in college, in the summers between college, they'll tree plant. So you go up in the north, you'll plant trees where they've logged, and it's kind of a big thing in all the provinces. And so he was a tree planter in this place called Swan Hills, Alberta, which is in northern Alberta. And at the time, he was telling me this in 1995, you couldn't Google anything anyone said. You just had to take them for their word.
Oh, yeah.
And so he basically said it was the highest density of grizzlies in all of North America, or in Canada. And because of that, they kept a shotgun at the tree caches where the planters they plant their trees, they go get some more trees at these caches and keep planting. And so he basically said that he used to plant with a couple of dogs. One was like a pit bull, one was like a half wolf, a couple of rough and tough dogs. Yeah. And they'd have him by his side when he was planting. And he used to plant also with a planting partner. People often like plant together to kind of keep each other company and all that sort of thing. And you described this girl, it's like a beautiful, blonde haired, blue eyed gal named Everest, kind of very distinct name. And so
that's quite a name.
Yes. Him and Everest were on the planting block one day. And so she was down at the one end planting with like headphones, listening to music, and he was at the other end. And he'd kind of first time I met him, he was kind of accentuating all his money lines with a cigarette, because he's a smoker. So he'd take these long, dramatic inhales and exhales kind of thing. Yeah. And so he kind of stops there in the middle of the street, and he goes, kind of takes a big drag and goes, and the dogs were acting squirrely that day, kind of like Clint Eastwood almost, right?
Okay.
It's a bit of a 1,000-yard stare. And so
he's a performative guy.
He kind of very serious though, like kind of like, kind of like the guy, Christian Bale with his Desperado song in Seinfeld. That's kind of an obscure reference, but kind of suddenly 1,000 yards. Yeah,
I get that reference.
But anyway, so he says, so he's planting away, and all of a sudden the two dogs start going crazy, and he looks up, and the dogs are sprinting for the other end of this cut block. And Everest is the far end of the cut block, a few hundred feet away. And he sees on one side of Everest, she's kind of hunched over planting. She can't hear or see anything because she's listening to music and she's focused on her work. And so on one side, a couple of grizzly bear cubs pop up on one side of her. And on the other side of her, mama bear comes. And so before the dogs can get in there and run interference, mama charges Everest, knocks her like 15 feet, ragdolls her. And then before the mom can do any more, the two dogs come in, run interference. My Lance at the time there, he runs back to the cache, grabs a shotgun, runs back, and then he pumps a shotgun, fires a warning shot in the air just to get the bear's attention. And then so when he's telling me the story, he kind of pauses at that moment, takes a big kind of inhale, and he goes, and then I had that bear's undivided attention. That was his money line for the story. And so right away, the mama bear turns around and runs at Lance full speed. He kind of pumps another shell in the chamber, waits, 60, 70, 50 feet, boom, pops it off, clips the bear. Bear still moving though, comes towards him, up on its hind legs, puts another shot in the bear's chest, boom, the bear falls down, and then he walks over calmly and coup de grace, puts one more in the bear's skull to finish it off. So the aftermath of the story is that Everest was fine. She had like a couple broken ribs, broken wrists. The two bear cubs were sent off to a wildlife sanctuary. And of course they weighed this female grizzly, and apparently it was over 1,000 pounds, the heaviest female grizzly they'd ever, weighed in the wild. So I go right away, wow, I'm going out on the trip with a wild man. This guy is pretty hardcore.
Yeah.
So then you imagine that we're going now, we set off on a 6-month trip across Canada, don't really know each other. And pretty much every person we met, or, ranger or someone who invited us in for dinner or coffee, he told this story because it was such a great story. It's like a great icebreaker, right?
Yeah.
And if you didn't tell,
it is a great story. Yeah.
if you didn't tell it, I would say, hey man, tell the bear story, right?
Tell the bear
great
story,
icebreaker. Yeah, tell it. Come on, what are you doing?
The fuck are you doing? Tell the bear story.
Exactly. And so meanwhile, on the trip itself, though, with six, we just weren't talking to each other. We didn't get along for various reasons, but we got to the end. And then remember at the end, he basically had his lawyer write up a piece of paper, unbeknownst to me, and serve it to me and tell me that any proceeds, any kind of, writing or stories or books or whatever, he owned everything. It was all his, everything from the trip. Even though I'd done all the photography and kept a detailed journal, he did. And so that kind of broke it off with me. For him, we pretty much didn't, talk to each other again. But a couple months after that, meeting a buddy at a pub, in North Vancouver, where I live here, he was a ski patroller. And so he came in and meet him for a beer. And he comes in with one of his fellow patrollers, and it's a beautiful blonde-haired, blue-eyed gal named Everest, of course. So here I am.
Get out of town. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, Everest in the flesh. And so I kind of say, wait, okay, just make sure it's not a coincidence. Did you ever plant in Swan Hills, Alberta? And she kind of goes, yeah, I did. You know a guy named Lance Weathers? She goes, yeah, I knew Lance. Just kind of offhand. And I go, well, how are you after the bear attack? And she goes, what, bear attack?
Oh.
So I tell the whole story I just told you, and she is completely flabbergasted. Says, well, I didn't really know Lance at all. He was just a guy in camp. And I never planted with him either. I planted with another guy. And then the only thing we had with grizzly, mama and cubs, is they came on our land once. We went back to get the shotgun, came back, and it was gone. And that was it. So he basically concocted this kind of hero rescue story for a girl he was probably infatuated with. And he told it as his kind of seminal representative, life story all the way across Canada. And then it made me reflect on that trip and say, did anything you tell me was anything true? Right? It was it all just, a pack of lies, but then
it's like a usual suspects type thing. Where
totally.
He's verbal Kant or whatever.
But then I guess, exactly. And I guess my conclusion is that, basically this cross Canada canoe trip was replacing his seminal life story that was a complete lie with something that was actually real. So now he had one. He went across Canada, and hopefully it wiped all that stuff away. So, but anyways, that's one of the kind of stories in the books. And so it's kind of like stories within stories, not necessarily, oh, then I did this, and then it's kind of like finding those nuggets and those themes and those kind of, almost the essence of the journey. Like I try to get out of everything. So I was kind of describing to you a little bit about the kind of why I do it and the essence of it and stuff like that. So I wasn't prepared here. It's just a little, I'm going to flick to the book here in a second here, but I'll just give you a few paragraphs out of this one here. Give a little reading for the audience. Here we go. So this is basically a story from an 1,800 kilometer journey. And I call this a loss. And so here we go. You guys ready?
Oh, we're ready.
Yeah. Okay. So lost. It eventually goes, the memory of her, of cuddling close in bed as she breathes softly in slumber. The pleasant, familiar scent of her hair inches away, that warmth, that security. It dissolves like sugar in the wilderness waters of this journey. I haven't seen or heard from my wife in weeks. Thoughts of her now rarely enter my mind. Bit by bit and day by day, she slips deeper into my subconscious until it's hard for me to fathom her existence. She is lost to me. I wake in the darkness on day 26, the tent fly flapping in the wind. It's not my wife beside me, but instead a huddled mound inside a sleeping bag, snoring away and smelling not so great. I elbow my tent mate, Sean, time to get up. A groan acknowledges the nudge. It's 3:30 a.m. on Casba Lake. Yesterday, we were pinned in by a northwest gale, the first time after 1,000 days of canoe tripping that I've ever had to sacrifice a full day of progress due to wind. The breeze has eased from gale to strong, and we're moving by 5 a.m. The more time I spend living wild in the north, the more I see similarities between us and the various creatures that make their home here. The land and the weather defines its inhabitants, not the other way around. Take, for example, the simple mosquito. This wispy insect can't fly in any kind of wind, waiting for a lull to allow its vampiric work. Similarly, we avoid wind when we paddle, working the lee shore as much as possible, and sometimes, like yesterday, unable to work against its power at all. When the wind finally calms and gives us an opening, we strike full force and with gusto, tearing at the water with our paddles like mosquitoes at flesh. Pulling hard out of our sheltered bay, we turn the canoe into the brunt of the blow for the final exposed 15-kilometer stretch of Kasbah that leads to the Kazan River. The sky is slate gray and the meter-high waves, steep and black, coming at us like endless sentries, fighting our forward progress. It takes a half hour to get comfortable with the rhythm of the waves, angling the canoe just so in order to carry us high and dry over a crest, into the trough, and then over the next crest. They come in ocean-like sets, building to a peak every 7 waves or so, and then easing off before building again. We groove to this rhythm for 3 hours until it hit the Kazan, its current sweetly pulling us away from the blustery lake and into its embrace. Lengthy expeditions like this one are about loss of comfort, loss of routine, loss of connection with those left behind. When everyday comforts are scuttled, life becomes exceedingly simple. A tent is home, a canoe is transportation, and all food needed is on board. You immerse fully in the simple act of moving forward through space and time without past or future to muddle the mind. So there you go. That was the opening of the story, Lost. So it's that kind of thing. That's why I do these trips. That's the state it puts me into.
I want to say, first of all, thank you, Frank, for doing that. That's beautifully written. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Also, I want to say thanks for showing me up and showing that you can read out loud much better than I can.
Wow.
No, but no, thank you so much for reading that excerpt.
I've done some readings before, so I've done that one before.
Yeah,
I think practice. Yeah,
I had a feeling you've had some practice.
Mhm.
All right, so Frank, we've reached the section of this podcast called the lightning round, and
right.
This is where I'm going to ask you questions at a very rapid pace. And for your part, you are meant to not think about it and gut reaction your answer. So try not to mull it over. Try to to whatever your gut says. That's
Fast.
the answer, because that's what we're trying to get at. That's how we play this game. It's kind of like a game portion. So and some of these questions are a little bit sillier, than others, but some of them are also very serious. And I really do want your honest opinion on.
Are these one-word answers? Just short and sweet, right? Yeah.
Just kind of like just whatever, like the first thing that pops in your head is that's kind of, I feel like, how I always ask everyone to do this. So
okay, got it.
Whatever the spirit strikes you as. First one would be this, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I feel that some forests feel friendlier than others. Why do you think that people experience certain campsites to be much spookier and less welcoming than others? And for that, I would say that scientific or supernatural answers, either or, are acceptable in this case.
I think it's whatever you're used to. Like, I'm a real forest person. I love like dark, coastal forest campsites. It's almost like you're snug beneath the forest, but some people like the open, arid desert. I don't like those campsites as much. They're just so dry and it just crackles. So I almost feel a bit exposed in those campsites.
Yeah.
I almost just, so for me, it's just more about the nature, the kind of the snug protective nature of a forest is where I like to be inside as far as that aesthetic.
We are precisely opposite.
Yeah.
I like
From
to camp
Arizona,
in the desert.
right? So yeah, exactly. And I have camped in the desert, I've been in the canyon lands in Utah and stuff like that, but it's definitely if I was to choose, I'd go forest for sure. Yeah.
I think we touched on this just a little bit briefly, but this is a little bit different. I've seen a photo of you carrying multiple packs of gear and dragging a kayak tethered to your waist across a frozen tundra. And the question is, how do you maintain strength through extreme exhaustion?
I find out I get, I think is a big thing these days, even about intermittent fasting, whatever. We have way too much food or energy now than we ever do. Like the diet I described before of like oatmeal, coffee, tortillas, meat and cheese, and freeze dried food. I can go all day long, and I just feel hyper energized. I think I'm energized by what's around me. I don't usually get exhausted. And
Really?
it's almost like, yeah, I think also I know how to pace myself. I mean, I go steady and I go at my steady pace, and it's a relatively quick pace for traveling through the wilderness. But you just get into a groove and a rhythm and are energized by everything around you. You don't really think too much about hunger. I always go into every trip, I lose about 20 pounds, typically usually I lose a pound a day for 20 days, and then I stabilize. And so in a 30-day trip, I'm kind of reach my lean hunted kind of weight, halfway through or whatever. And but the energy is amazing there. Your body becomes super efficient at moving. It actually gets stronger in these times. I mean, you have long days, you do get tired for sure, and there are limits to how you don't get exhausted, but it's amazing. Like I'm just wired on these trips. I'll like sleep 4 hours a night. I'm excited about every day, and it just keeps me hyper. I think it's as much a mental state as a physical state for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely everything you said about the mental state and in your environment, but also you did in the beginning. Are you one of the people that kind of swears by oatmeal as a power
It's
food?
just simple. I don't know if it's a power food. It's just like, it's light and it'll keep, and 3 packets a day of Quaker, whatever I can get my hands on before the trip.
I've known guys, even like kind of bodybuilder type guys,
Mm-hmm.
and they like swear by hitting the oatmeal before the gym, which is a kind of an unusual pre-workout meal. But,
right. Yeah.
But I mean, also I've seen people with the kind of results. Shit, it must work.
Yeah, it's just calories. It's just calories. And on a trip like that, you burn everything up. So it doesn't matter. Probably doesn't matter what you eat, whatever you choose. Like last year, the partner I did the trip with, she was completely keto. So she brought a full keto diet along. So her diet was completely opposite of mine, but for her, it worked great. So,
Wow, that seems like that would be terrible to be on a low carb diet on an endurance based.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think she'd been doing it for long enough that her body adapted to it, and she felt very energized by it. I think she did break from her diet near the end of the trip and stole like a whole box of my mac and cheese. Just a bit of a cheater time, but she pretty much stuck to it the whole way. So yeah.
Here's a question, and this is kind of a two-parter, because first I just need to ask, and I'm sure you are, but are you familiar with the story of the Terror, the British expedition to discover the Northern Pass over North America?
Yeah, I actually tried to row the Northwest Passage in 2013. We got stopped by ice pretty much where the Terror went down. So I'm very familiar with it. Yeah.
And I guess the second part of that question does not even need to be asked, because I was going to ask you, had you been alive in that time period, would you have been one of the people that would have thought that was a good idea to go through the Northern Pass?
Sure.
But it turns out you tried to in a
rowboat.
small one-man craft rowing. So
yes. If you go to my YouTube channel, the movie about that one's called The Hand of Franklin, and Franklin was the captain of the Erebus, one of the two the Erebus and the Terror. Basically, he was leading the expedition, but our story is called The Hand of Franklin. So you can get the modern sense of that area if you'll check that out.
Franklin was the one that, according to supernatural mythology, he was killed by some kind of it was an Inuit demon type creature that I can't recall the name of. Do you know about this?
The only one I like the demon, and there's definitely lots of demons in mythology, but I mean the Wendigo is the demon. It's more of like a boreal demon of the Cree and stuff like that. But and that kind of takes men in the night kind of thing. Yeah,
the Wendigo.
I'm sure. Yeah, the Wendigo, and then I'm sure the Inuit have their own version of that too. Right?
Yeah, I think it was something of that. I mean, I'm not sitting here claiming that is what happened to the captain of that ship, but I'm pretty sure according to some legend, that's what happened. Is the Wendigo took him because he was the first one to go, I think. It all fell on the other captain, who was kind of a lesser, not necessarily lesser, but a less respected captain, and he had less command of the sailors.
Well, basically, no one really knows what happened to them because they all died.
Wendigo got along.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I did another trip in 2019, and we skied the route of this guy, John Ray, and he's actually the guy who discovered. So in 1854, he skied from Hudson Bay overland up to the Northwest Passage, and he ran into a bunch of Inuit who had John Ray did, who told stories of this guy. At that point, they didn't know Franklin was dead, hadn't been confirmed, and they said, "Oh, yeah, we found all these human body parts in pots and this sort of thing. They'd been eating each other in their starved kind of state, and they actually had pipes and implements that had like terror and Erebus monogrammed on them. So they actually proved that they had seen these guys. I mean, the ship had been long scuttled by the ice, but John Ray was the first guy to actually confirm that. And when he brought that news back to England in 1854, he was actually completely eviscerated in society. Charles Dickens was a high member of society, and he wrote a big op-ed against this guy, John Ray, disparaging, because they refused to believe that any member of the British military would resort to cannibalism. So this whole story that John Ray just brought back as a fact based on evidence, it was actually, buried and swept under the rug. And John Ray was basically, persona non grata in British society after that, because of that whole thing. So, but it was, So we basically followed the same route, brutal cold temperatures. My feet went totally sour on that trip. So I can't imagine some guy in 1854 doing that, or Franklin and his crew surviving these long winters in like -40 and 50, waiting for the ice to go through. I mean, those guys, there were no planes, there's nowhere to get to them. They were just screwed and hoping for the best. And they all went sideways.
Locked in the ice for years.
I mean, for sure.
As they slowly, that was a depressing question. I'm sorry.
But I am familiar anyways with it. Yeah. Sorry.
This one I think is very important. And I think I would love to hear your take on this, for being someone who is extremely experienced and skilled. And so from your point of view, I think this is a great place to hear it from, instead of maybe from someone who's just saying like, hey, get outside and, see nature, I think, and it's also about conservation. I think it's about, this is something, a belief I have. It's a theory. Right. Maybe it might not be the most important thing. Obviously there's, regulation on industry would be more important, but it's got to start somewhere. And I think that one of the steps to conservation of wildlife and land is to get more people to get out and experience the wilderness and have a greater understanding of what we're losing. And I think, from you, what is some advice that you would give people that don't have wilderness survival skills, they're amateurs, but for them to get out into nature and have a meaningful experience, something that would help for them, help them to have the appreciation necessary to know why we need to put regulations on different types of industry and things like that to protect the wildlife, protect the rivers,
Yeah, I mean, I think like my approach to my journeys is keep it very simple. It doesn't have to be complicated. You don't need a whole lot of gear to get out and appreciate nature. Like I basically, like all my trips, be it like 30, 60, 100 days, whatever, it's just really, if you think about it, it's just a weekend trip with a bit more food. You're using the same gear. It's the same tent, it's the same canoe, it's the same kind of packs and kind of basic clothing you bring along. All you're doing is figuring out how to do the food. They're picking it up along the way or supplementing or whatever, right? So it's really simple that way. I think also to get a really meaningful experience, I don't think if you go car camping and stuff like that, that's the way to go. I always like to say, like, the journey begins at the end of the road. If you can just get somewhere, you don't have to go very far, even if you walk a few hours, but just, walk under your own power, on a hiking trail that takes you, past the crowds. Because most people they won't go very far. Like in canoeing, most people won't go, past that first canoe carry to the next lake, and they're going to stop there. And you go a couple extra carries in, it's not complicated. It gives you a bit more, maybe takes a bit more time, but you'll get to those places where you really experience kind of true nature. And it doesn't take very long to get that. Just think about an end of the road place, even if it's like a trail that takes you, a few hours up, you can pretty quickly get away. If you get away from where all the kind of the motorized transport gets you, then you're really going to experience that in a really easy way. And it doesn't take very long. It doesn't take a lot of resources, doesn't take a lot of gear or experience. I mean, all you're doing is you're living, you're breathing, you're eating, you have a shelter, which is your tent. You have a little stove you can cook on just like at home or over fire. And you have a sleeping bag. You even take a blanket. It'll all work. I mean, nature is where we're meant to be, and it doesn't. Yeah, I think almost the simpler you make it, the easier it is, and it doesn't take long to get into it.
All right, I think to summarize, we could say, obviously, simplicity and go the extra mile that it takes to get past the crowds, so that you really are, you're not just in a big ass crowded campsite, because that's not quite
exactly. Yeah. That's crowded campsite. It's still nice to be outside and stuff like that for sure. And for a quick weekend getaway or just a base camp at a climbing area and that sort of thing, it's good. But if you want a more of a real wilderness experience, you gotta, take a bit more time to get it takes nothing worthwhile, I think, is easy. And so putting a little bit of effort, even for a weekend trip, is definitely going to give you a better experience for sure.
Oh yeah. And I maybe I wanted to take a step back and say, I'm not trying to disparage just recreational camping in a regular crowded park.
Yeah.
Like that's very fun. It's really fun, especially if you can cook out and,
yeah.
you can always
you were talking more of a real wilderness experience, right? So
yeah, that's what I was trying to say.
Yep. For sure.
So I wasn't disparaging the recreational thing, but I was also trying to say that why not take a little bit of extra effort and
exactly,
maybe a little bit more discomfort,
Yeah, and it's totally fun to go with a group of friends to like a car camping area, or whatever. It's a great time, and it's always a hoot to have a few beers and kind of recreate in the area and that sort of thing. And it's a different kind of fun, though, in terms of like getting out there and kind of tapping into that kind of that kind of deeper wildness in yourself, and that kind of calm and quiet. I think getting away from that is definitely worthwhile.
Absolutely. Oh, and Frank, man, I have to ask you the most important question of all. Where can people find you? Where can they find your book? Where can they check out your movies? And do you want to give any shout outs, like maybe to your sponsors or any of your co-explorers?
Yeah, for sure. My sponsors I have right now is Skeef, is a canoe company that give me canoes for years. Kokatat Water Sportswear, they're out of California. They hooked me up with my paddle wear, dry suits, all that sort of stuff. MSR as well, Sea Line, lots of Werner paddles, Seal spray skirts. So a bunch of different companies have helped me out over the years. Arc'teryx as well for my winter stuff. And as far as where I can be found, Instagram is like at FrankWolf70. It's YouTube is just Frank Wolf. Find me on YouTube. There's also, I should be able to come up. Frank Wolf Adventure.
That's super simple. Just Frank Wolf.
Yeah.
YouTube. That's dope.
Yeah, exactly. And then
how'd you beat everyone else named Frank Wolf to that?
Yeah, it seems to work for me. It's probably just Google the algorithm. So you might have to dig a bit deep. Put it like Frank Wolf canoe and you'll find it, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
That'll get in the search engine. And in terms of fellow adventurers, friends and people, I mean, two great. The one thing about doing these journeys with someone, if you're doing a trip, whoever it is you're doing this trip with, especially a long journey, it basically becomes like a bond for life. It's something that you, 2 or 3 or 4 people have that only you can understand. And you've been through this very unique experience traveling through, a wilderness in the ways very few people have, if at all. Right. So yeah, all the amazing friends and people I've done trips with recently is like Amber Blencaron, Dave Beresford, Sean Oliora, Taku Hokoyama, Rob Hart, Sean Campbell, the list goes on and on, Todd McGowan. I've gone through a lot of partners over the years. It's interesting that I've been doing this for so long that I keep, I keep going on year after year after year, but people's, lives change. People have families, they move, they change their priorities, they get more serious jobs, and they can't go on these journeys with me anymore. So I'm always, often, especially during the pandemic, I've had so many people drop out on me and having to scramble deep into the recesses of the outdoor world and people who I think can do it to get these trips. So I've got like a list of people that I can kind of go down and eventually someone will say yes, kind of thing. Right. So that's all part of the challenge. But once you've done the trip, this person intimately in a way, probably their wives or husbands don't even know as well. So it's like, it's a unique experience that kind of bonds you for life, and it's very special. So I always like to do trips with people. I don't do solos usually. I like that interactivity. It's better for filming and photography, I find too. It's better for the story and all that sort of thing. So I like that kind of combination. So shout out to anyone who's ever done a trip with me, in the last 25, 30 years. So
right. Frank, thank you so much for being on the show, man.
Well, thanks for having me, man. It's great to chat with you, and hopefully people can check out the book Lions on the Map, Amazon.com. You can find it there or in a lot of bookstores and that sort of thing. You can order from your local independent bookstore, which I'd like to encourage people to do too. Support those local independent bookstores. They can get any book you want in there for sure. It's worth the effort. Hopefully people enjoy it. It's a compilation of like 25 different stories. Mostly them. I'm a regular feature writer for Explore and have written for years. And so a lot of them, 16 of the 24 stories are previously published in various magazines, but there's 8 new ones in there too to kind of fill it out. So it's a good variety of adventure stuff from skiing to canoeing to kayaking, biking, rowing, all the different kind of modes of transportation in North America as well as in Asia and Europe too. So
Yeah, I wanted to back you up on that. If it is if you have the opportunity to get it from an independent bookstore, do that. Should be your first choice.
For sure.
Or that's just my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's great to support the independent bookstores. So.
Thanks for listening to My Views Are My Own. Today's outro song is friends of the show, Lovercraft, performing their version of Teardrop by Massive Attack. If you want to contact me, go to myviewsaremyown.com or myviewsaremyown_podcast on Instagram or myviews_podcast on Twitter. Thanks.